In the depths of night, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, the sprawling Walmart Supercenter at the edge of town transformed into a cavernous maze of shadows and silence. For Emma, a young employee who had recently taken on the graveyard shift, the store's endless aisles and towering shelves felt both familiar and foreboding. She had always been intrigued by the stark contrast between the daytime bustle, with shoppers bustling about, children's laughter echoing through the toy section, and cash registers continuously chiming, and the eerie quiet that settled after midnight. Tonight, as the clock struck 11:45 p.m., a chill ran down her spine, not just from the store's overactive air conditioning, but from a growing sense of unease. The usual late-night customers, typically few and far between, were tonight non-existent. This left Emma alone in her duties, which ranged from restocking shelves to managing the self-checkout area, where the only sound was the occasional beep of scanned items, interrupting the low hum of the overhead lights. Her new co-worker, Tom, was supposed to be sharing the shift, but he had a knack for disappearing at odd times, often found in the break room engrossed in his phone or taking extended bathroom breaks. Despite his laid-back attitude, Emma found his presence somewhat reassuring. The idea of being entirely alone in the vast store was unsettling. Tonight, however, Tom's usual detachment felt more pronounced, his brief appearances marked by disinterested glances and mumbled responses. As Emma pushed a heavy cart filled with overstocked items down the darkened toy aisle, her ears pricked at the sound of the front doors sliding open, a rare occurrence so late in the evening. Peering down the length of the store, she caught sight of a figure entering, a man wearing a nondescript gray hoodie and a dark baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, almost floating, sent a wave of anxiety through her. He didn't head for the essentials, no late-night run for medicine or baby formula, but instead drifted towards the home goods section, his hands brushing against the end caps as if feeling his way through a fog. Emma tried to shake off her discomfort, telling herself it was just another customer, perhaps a night owl like herself or someone off a late shift needing to unwind. But as the minutes ticked by, she couldn't ignore the prickle of fear creeping up her spine. The man seemed to wander without purpose, his path meandering and erratic, intersecting repeatedly with her own as she moved from aisle to aisle. Attempting to focus on her work, Emma bent to arrange a lower shelf. When she stood, she found herself staring directly into an aisle mirror, and in its reflection saw the man again. He was standing far too close, watching her. Their eyes met in the glass, and Emma's heart skipped a beat. His gaze was unsettling, penetrating, as if he was peering into her rather than at her. Unnerved, she quickly moved away, pretending to check her inventory scanner for task updates. Despite her attempts to avoid him, their paths crossed again near the electronics section. This time he was closer, and as Emma stocked some return DVDs, she could feel his gaze weighing heavily upon her. Plucking up her courage, she turned to face him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her fingers tightly gripping the box cutter in her pocket. He looked at her, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of confusion, or was it recognition, in his eyes. He shook his head slowly, almost sorrowfully. "No, just looking," he murmured, his voice low and raspy. As he turned away, Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She watched him disappear into the next aisle, and the vague silhouette of his retreating form seemed to blend into the shadows, leaving Emma to wonder if she had imagined the intensity of the encounter. With each minute that ticked by as she resumed her tasks, the store's silence seemed to grow louder, the shadows darker. Emma found herself glancing over her shoulder, her nerves frayed, every sound amplified in the emptiness. The night was far from over, and the mystery of the late-night visitor hung heavy in the air, a palpable presence that Emma could neither ignore nor escape. The unsettling encounter lingered in Emma's mind as she continued her nightly duties. With each aisle she turned down, her sense of unease grew, fueled by the eerie quiet of the vast, almost empty Walmart Supercenter. The lone shopper's strange behavior had spiked her anxiety, and Emma found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, her pulse quickening at the slightest sound, a box falling from a shelf, the distant hum of the freezer units. Her co-worker, Tom, was of little reassurance, seemingly oblivious to Emma's growing discomfort. When she found him tucked away in the back room, immersed in his phone, she hesitated, then decided to share her concerns. "There's this guy," she began, her voice a whisper. "He's just off, keeps wandering around, watching me." Tom glanced up, his expression one of mild annoyance. "It's a big store, Emma. People wander. It's probably nothing." Despite his words, his disinterest was palpable, and he quickly returned his attention to his phone. Feeling dismissed, but too unnerved to let it go, Emma decided to handle things on her own. She walked back to the sales floor with a sense of determination, clutching her handheld device like a lifeline. She scanned the nearby aisles. The man was nowhere to be seen. Was he just a figment of her overactive imagination? Her rational mind scolded her. With each step she took, the silence of the store seemed to press in on her, punctuated by the occasional flicker of overhead lights that added an otherworldly glow to the deserted aisles. She ventured back toward the home goods section, the last place she'd seen the mysterious man. As she rounded the corner, her breath caught in her throat. The man was there, standing still among the array of colorful bed linens as if contemplating the patterns. But his focus wasn't on the products. His eyes, dark and intent, were fixed directly on her. A cold shiver ran down Emma's spine as she stopped dead in her tracks, her earlier fear solidifying into a tangible threat. The man's face was expressionless, his gaze unblinking and unnerving. Emma mustered her courage, her voice barely steady. "Sir, we'll be closing soon. Can I help you find what you need so you can check out?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued to stare, making Emma's skin crawl. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice low and disturbingly calm. "No need. I'm just enjoying the night. Much like you, I suppose." His words, though spoken softly, carried an implicit threat that sent a wave of panic through Emma. She took a step back, her mind racing for a logical course of action. Should she call for security? Confront him further? The isolation of the late hour made her feel incredibly vulnerable, her usual confidence as a night shift worker replaced by a primal fear. As she deliberated, the man took a step closer, his movements slow but deliberate. Emma's heart pounded in her ears. She quickly turned and walked briskly towards the front of the store, pretending to answer a call on her store radio. "Security to aisle 14? She spoke into the device, hoping her bluff would deter him. She didn't look back to see if he followed. She couldn't. Fear propelled her forward, her steps quick and uneven. As she reached the brightly lit front area of the store, she glanced around wildly for any sign of Tom or another employee, but the checkout lanes were deserted, the usual nighttime cashier evidently on a break. The front doors were still open, the automatic sensors allowing anyone, or anything, in and out of the store freely. The reality of the situation settled in. She was virtually alone, save for her unsettling follower. Heart racing, Emma ducked into the employee break room, slamming the door behind her and locking it. She leaned against it, breathing hard, trying to calm her fraying nerves. The room felt like a temporary sanctuary, but she knew it was just that, temporary. She needed to alert the authorities, but her phone was in her locker, outside the room. She was contemplating her next move when a soft thud against the door made her jump. Her eyes darted to the security monitor positioned above the break room door, where she could see the store's main area. The screen flickered, then stabilized, showing the figure of the man. He was standing just outside the break room, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for any sign of her. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she watched him. He didn't move to leave, nor did he attempt to force his way in. Instead, he simply stood there, a sentinel of the night, his presence a silent assertion of control and intimidation. The store's overhead lights cast shadows across his face, masking his expressions, enhancing the enigma and escalating the terror that held Emma captive in her supposed haven. They'd reached their destination, and minutes later the store's haven sputtered to life. As Emma watched the man's unmoving form through the grainy security monitor, her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and defiance. The minutes stretched on, each one thick with tension, as the man seemed content to wait her out, standing ominously outside the break room door. The stillness was unnerving, and Emma fought to keep her breathing steady, her thoughts racing for a way out. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally moved. He turned and walked away, his steps slow and measured. Emma's relief was palpable. but it was short-lived. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was a temporary reprieve, that the man would return. She needed to act, and she needed to act now. With shaky hands, she retrieved her phone from her locker, quickly dialing 911. The Savin Bank was safe at night. The phone rang, and rang, a beacon of hope as she whispered her location into the receiver, her voice barely audible. "Walmart Supercenter on Highway 49, please hurry," she implored, her voice cracking. The dispatcher's calm voice was a lifeline, promising that help was on its way. Emma was instructed to stay on the line, keep the door locked, and wait for the police. Every sound from the store beyond her makeshift sanctuary made her jump, her eyes darting back to the security screen, half expecting to see the man's figure return. But the screen showed nothing. The store lay bathed in the dim, eerie glow of nighttime lighting, each aisle casting long, dark shadows that seemed to twitch in Emma's peripheral vision. It was in this tense atmosphere that Emma heard it. A soft, scuffling sound from the direction of the loading docks at the back of the store. It was faint, barely audible over the sound of her own rapid breathing, but it was enough to spike her adrenaline once more. Emma squeezed the phone tighter, her whisper urgent. "I heard something at the back. He might be trying to get in." The dispatcher's reassurance did little to calm her. As she waited, huddled in the break room, Emma's mind raced with possibilities. Was the man working alone? Was he really after something in the store? Or was it her he wanted? She shuddered at the thought, her skin prickling with fear. Then, without warning, the lights in the store flickered and went out, plunging the interior into darkness. The security monitor flickered with them, the images it displayed stuttering and then vanishing, leaving Emma in the suffocating grip of pitch-black uncertainty. Her breaths came in short, sharp gasps, the darkness around her seeming to press in on all sides. In the oppressive blackness, Emma's other senses sharpened. She could hear the hum of the refrigeration units in the distance, the occasional creak and groan of the building settling. And then, clearer than before, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps that seemed to be moving towards the front of the store. Frozen with terror, Emma remained silent, listening as the footsteps grew louder, closer. They stopped, then started again, this time accompanied by a low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Her imagination conjured images of the man stalking the dark aisles, searching for her, or worse, barricading the exits. It was then that Emma realized the true depth of her peril. She was trapped, hidden yet vulnerable, in a dark, sprawling store with a man who had shown a chilling persistence. Her isolation was complete, the darkness a shroud that hid both her and her pursuer in a macabre dance of hide-and-seek. Her hand trembled as she whispered into the phone, her voice a mix of fear and pleading. "Please, you have to hurry. He's inside and the power's out. I can't see anything." The dispatcher's voice was a steady presence in her ear, urging her to stay calm, to not make a sound, to keep herself hidden. Emma nodded, her body tensed for action, even as she felt the paralyzing grip of fear. As she waited in agonizing suspense, a faint glow appeared under the door. The headlights of the arriving police cars, slicing through the darkness like a promise of salvation. Relief surged through Emma, but it was tempered by caution. Until she heard the voices of the officers, saw their badges and uniforms, she dared not move. The wait was excruciating, each second a drawn-out ordeal of anticipation and dread. But finally, the sound of voices approached, the clear, authoritative tones of the police cutting through the stillness of the night. Emma let out a choked sob of relief, her body sagging against the door as she heard the officers call out, announcing their presence. With the police now sweeping the store, the nightmare seemed to draw to a close. Yet as Emma stepped out from her hiding place, her relief was overshadowed by a deep-seated unease. The questions that had haunted her throughout the ordeal remained unanswered, the man's motives unclear, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a chilling thought lingered, that in the shadows of the store, in the aisles she had walked 1,000 times, secrets lingered, and perhaps the danger was far from over. The aftermath of the night's terror was visible on Emma's face as she recounted the events to the police in the stark fluorescence of the Walmart Supercenter's back office. Officers meticulously noted her statements, their expressions a mix of concern and professional detachment. Emma, wrapped in a police-issued blanket, her hands clutching a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, shook visibly. not just from the cold but from the replaying images of the night's horrors. Outside, the parking lot was bathed in the blue and red lights of police vehicles, casting long, eerie shadows that danced across the store's facade. Detective Sarah Martinez, who had taken charge of the scene, was deep in conversation with her team, pointing towards the various entrances and occasionally glancing at Emma through the office window, with a look that was both reassuring and filled with unresolved questions. Inside, Emma tried to compose herself. The detective had explained that they had found signs of forced entry at the rear delivery entrance, subtle but definite signs that someone had tampered with the lock. Even more disturbing was the discovery of several large bags near the back exit, filled with assorted high-value items from electronics to jewelry, apparently staged for quick removal. It was clear now, this hadn't been a random break-in, it was planned, targeted, and Emma had inadvertently interrupted it. Emma's mind raced as she tried to piece together the night's events with these new facts. She remembered the unnerving silence that had followed the man's departure, the darkness that enveloped her as the power cut off, and the chilling realization that she was not alone. The feeling of being hunted had been palpable, and now, knowing the intruder had been preparing to cart off stolen goods, made her shiver anew. Detective Martinez entered the office, her face solemn. "Emma," she began, sitting down across from her. "We've reviewed the security footage leading up to the power outage. It's clear you did everything you could under the circumstances. We've got a team checking the exterior cameras to track his escape route. But I need to ask, did you notice anything unusual in the days or even hours leading up to tonight that might help us?" Emma racked her brain, trying to think past the fear. I don't know. It was just a normal day, really. But when he looked at the cameras, it was like he knew exactly where they were, like he'd been here before. Her voice faltered as the weight of her realization hit her. He had been watching, planning, familiarizing himself with every corner of her workplace. Detective Martinez nodded, jotting down notes. "We're working on the assumption that he's been in the store multiple times. We'll be reviewing past footage to see if we can spot him on other days. Maybe we can track his movements, figure out how he knew the layout so well." As the detective spoke, Emma's thoughts drifted to the CCTV monitors she'd watched him on. The way he'd paused, his gaze piercing through the grainy black and white as if staring right at her. It wasn't just the store he had studied, he had been observing her, learning her patterns. The room felt suddenly claustrophobic, the walls too close. Emma stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. "Can I see the footage?" she asked, needing to see for herself, to understand. Martinez hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." They moved to the security room where a junior officer was rewinding footage. The screens flickered, then settled on a loop from earlier in the day. There he was, Emma's breath caught. The same man, but this time in different clothes, mingling with other customers, his movements casual but deliberate. "See there?" Martinez pointed to a frame where the man paused, looking directly at a camera. "He's casing the place. Damn it, he's professional." Emma watched, transfixed, as the timeline of her ordinary day was recast into the prelude of her nightmare. The man reappeared repeatedly, each instance a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that depicted a much larger, more menacing picture than Emma had ever imagined her daily environment could conceal. Hours passed as they reviewed more footage, the morning light beginning to seep through the blinds, casting bars of light across the dark room. Emma felt a chill as she realized the depth of her vulnerability, how the ordinary could turn sinister with just a shift of context. Detective Martinez finally shut down the monitors. "We'll keep a unit here tonight, Emma. I don't expect he'll try again, but we're taking no chances. You've been through enough." As Emma prepared to leave, the weight of the night's revelations heavy on her shoulders. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The fear lingered, a silent stalker in its own right, as if the very shadows had eyes, and the quiet whisper of the night was but a prelude to darker whispers still unheard. The sense of being watched might fade with the rising sun, but Emma knew the fear would not. It had imprinted itself on her psyche, a dark ink blot on the canvas of her once mundane life. In the days following the incident, Emma found herself enveloped in a palpable sense of paranoia that she couldn't shake. The bustling environment of Walmart, once a place of mundane routine, now felt laden with hidden threats. Every shadow seemed to move with sinister intent. Every unexpected noise made her heart leap. Despite assurances from law enforcement and increased security measures around the store, Emma's nerves frayed thinner with each passing shift. The store itself had taken on a new character. Shelves and aisles she had known like the back of her hand now seemed to harbor secrets, whispering of dangers lurking around each corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed a little too loudly, casting stark shadows that seemed to flicker with malicious delight. Customers, once merely part of the store's daily tapestry, now appeared as potential threats, their faces momentarily morphing into that of her assailant. In the dimmer corners of her vision, Detective Martinez kept her updated on the investigation, but progress was frustratingly slow. They had managed to trace the intruder's escape route using exterior cameras and had even found a set of fingerprints on the back door, presumably where he had exited. Yet, there were no matches in the database, no known suspects who fit the profile. It was as if the man was a ghost, evaporating into the night air after his haunting presence in the store. Emma's interactions at work became strained. Her colleagues, aware of her ordeal, oscillated between giving her cautious, pity-filled glances and attempting to engage her in normal conversation, as if to weave a thread of normalcy back into her life. But the normal had been irrevocably altered for Emma. The break room, where she used to spend her breaks laughing and sharing stories with colleagues, now felt like a confessional booth where she replayed the events endlessly in her mind, each iteration chipping away at her sense of security. One evening, as she was restocking shelves, her hand brushed against a pack of batteries, the same kind the intruder had touched that night. Her breath hitched, and the pack clattered to the floor, batteries rolling like dark eyes staring up at her. Panic gripped her. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she hurriedly scooped them up, her eyes darting around to see if anyone had noticed her distress. Later, as she pushed a cart full of returns through the back storage area, the dimly lit corridor seemed to close in around her. The hum of the overhead lights was like a chorus of whispers, and every echo of her footsteps was a reminder that she was alone. She thought she heard something, a soft shuffling sound behind a stack of boxes. Her heart raced as she slowly approached, her every instinct screaming to run, but her body rigid with fear. Peering around the stack, she found nothing but the usual disarray of back stock and dusty shelves. Laughing weakly at her own nerves, she turned back to her cart, only to stop dead in her tracks. There, laid out neatly on top of her returns, was a single, crumpled $5 bill, the same denomination the intruder had handed her that night. It couldn't be a coincidence. It was a message. Chilled to the bone, Emma dropped the cart handle and raced to the security office, her mind reeling. Was he back? Had he been watching her this whole time, taunting her? In the security room, she frantically told her tale to the on-duty officer, who immediately reviewed the recent camera feeds. They showed nothing unusual, no unauthorized entries, no one in the store who shouldn't be there. Emma slumped in a chair, her body trembling not just from fear but also from the maddening implication of it all. Was she losing her mind? Was the trauma manifesting in hallucinations now? That night, as she lay in bed, the shadows of her room morphed into menacing shapes. Every small sound was magnified. A car passing by, the house settling, the distant bark of a dog, all translated into the footfalls of her persistent nightmare. Sleep was elusive, each tick of the clock a reminder of her unraveling sense of reality. The next morning brought no relief. The dull sunlight seemed to mock her fear, casting long, sinister shadows across her living room. Emma's reflection in the mirror was that of a woman she barely recognized. Haunted eyes, pallid skin, a frame jumping at the slightest sound. As she prepared for another day, the fear that something or someone might again breach her fragile sanctuary lingered, a constant spectral presence in her peripheral vision. Emma realized then that the incident at Walmart wasn't just a singular event. It was the beginning of an ongoing torment, whether real or conjured by her traumatized psyche. The boundary between reality and nightmare had blurred, leaving her to navigate a world where every moment brimmed with potential terror, and every shadow could be more than just a dark reflection. As the weeks dragged on, the atmosphere in the store shifted from routine to charged with an undercurrent of tension that everyone seemed to feel. Customers were fewer, and those who came whispered about the rumors they had heard. Emma's colleagues were supportive but kept a watchful eye on her, their concern palpable in their frequent checks and quiet conversations. Emma appreciated their efforts, but the constant reminders only served to heighten her sense of unease. Detective Martinez became a regular presence at the store, his updates a mix of reassurances and frustrating news of dead ends. The fingerprints had been a hopeful lead, but without a match they were just another piece of an unsolved puzzle. He suggested they might be dealing with someone skilled enough to avoid previous capture, possibly a professional, which only deepened the mystery and Emma's fear. One afternoon, a particularly harrowing encounter pushed Emma's already frayed nerves to the brink. While organizing the seasonal aisle, she noticed someone watching her from the end of the row. The figure was obscured by shadows, making it hard to see any distinct features, but the stature and the intensity of the gaze felt eerily familiar. Heart pounding, she tried to dismiss it as a customer browsing, but when she looked again, the figure was gone, vanished without a sound. Shaken, Emma reported the incident to security. They conducted a sweep but found no one matching her description. Reviewing the security tapes yielded nothing. The cameras had somehow missed capturing the figure. This discrepancy between her clear memory and the lack of evidence made her question her own sanity. Was her mind playing tricks, manifesting her fears into phantoms? This lingering doubt consumed her, making each shift an ordeal. She began to see shadows move in her periphery, hear whispers in the silence of the stockroom, feel the prickle of unseen eyes on her back. Sleep became elusive, filled with nightmares of being chased through endless store aisles by an unseen force. Then came the night that would change everything. Closing time was nearing, and the store was unusually quiet. Emma was tasked with locking up. As she made her rounds, ensuring all customers were out and doors secured, a cold breeze swept through the front entrance. She shivered, realizing one of the doors hadn't locked properly. As she approached to secure it, she noticed a figure standing just outside the glass, cloaked in darkness. Frozen, she stared at the figure, her breath fogging up the glass. The figure mirrored her, its breath also visible on the other side of the door, creating a chillingly intimate moment of symmetry. Emma's heart raced as she backed away, but her legs felt like lead. She fumbled for her radio to call security, but as she looked back, the figure was gone. Only the cold breeze and a whisper of movement in the air remained. Rattled, but needing to ensure the door was locked, Emma gathered her courage and approached again. As she reached for the lock, her eyes caught something on the ground, a piece of paper weighed down by a small rock. With trembling hands, she picked it up and unfolded it. The message was simple, chilling to the bone. "See you inside." Rushing back into the safety of the store, Emma locked the door and called security. When they arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, and a sweep of the building revealed nothing. The store was declared secure, but Emma couldn't shake the terror that clung to her like a second skin. In the days that followed, her life became a series of cautious routines and fearful glances over her shoulder. The store's management installed additional security cameras and increased nighttime patrols, but the sense of security they were meant to provide felt superficial. Emma's encounters grew more frequent, shadows darting just out of sight, distant footsteps echoing when she was alone, whispered threats that left her spinning around in panic, only to find nothing. The climax of these haunting events came one late evening when Emma was stocking shelves. The lights flickered, a now too familiar occurrence that she tried to ignore. But then, the whispers started, soft and menacing, swirling around her like a malevolent breeze. She spun around, her own scream catching in her throat as she faced the empty aisle. "Who's there?" Her voice was a mix of defiance and fear. The response was a soft, mocking laugh that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Emma stumbled back, her eyes darting around, trying to locate the source of the laughter. But then, as suddenly as it had started, silence fell heavy and suffocating. Heart pounding, she raced to the front of the store, the echoes of her footsteps a stark reminder of her solitude. She reached for her phone to call Detective Martinez, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. As she dialed, the overhead lights buzzed loudly and went out, plunging her into darkness. The phone slipped from her trembling hands, clattering to the floor. In the pitch black, her breath sounded loud and ragged, her frantic heartbeat the only other sound. Then, in the darkness, a voice whispered right next to her ear, "You're not alone." Emma screamed, the sound tearing through the silent store like a siren as she felt a cold hand clamp down on her shoulder. The grip on Emma's shoulder was icy and firm, sending a visceral wave of terror through her. She twisted violently, managing to break free, her heart hammering against her ribcage as she stumbled blindly in the darkness. Her only thought was escape. She needed light, safety, anything that wasn't this consuming blackness and the chilling presence she could feel lurking just beyond her reach. Frantically, she clawed her way along the wall, her fingers seeking the emergency flashlight they kept mounted by the fire exit. Her hands finally clasped around it. Her relief was short-lived as the beam flickered on, casting long, ominous shadows across the aisles. The light revealed nothing but the ordinary disarray of products and promotional stands. No sign of any intruder. Yet the palpable sense of being hunted remained, an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. Armed with the flashlight, Emma pressed on, her steps shaky. The store was silent now, the earlier whispers and laughter replaced by a suffocating stillness that seemed to watch her, bide its time. As she moved, her beam of light trembled along with her hands, darting from one shadow to the next. Every rustle, every shift within the store's depths made her jump, her skin crawling with dread. She made her way towards the security office, hoping to barricade herself inside until the police arrived. The tight corridor to the office never seemed so long as it did now, each step fraught with the expectation of a hand reaching out from the darkness. She reminded herself to breathe, to focus on moving forward, one slow step at a time. The security office door loomed ahead, a beacon of relative safety. Emma quickened her pace, her breaths coming in sharp bursts. As she reached for the handle, a sudden sharp noise echoed behind her, a crash of something heavy hitting the floor. She swung around, the flashlight's beam slicing through the darkness to the source of the noise. An aisle of cleaning supplies had been knocked over, bottles strewn across the floor, their contents pooling underneath the shelving. The sight stopped her cold. Not because of the mess, but because there, among the shadows, two luminescent eyes caught the light, watching her. They blinked, unblinking and calculating, then disappeared as if they had never been there. Emma's scream caught in her throat, choked by fear. With no time to think, she slammed the security door behind her, locking it swiftly. The room was small, cramped with monitors that cast an eerie glow. She stumbled to the panel, her hands shaking as she switched every camera to live feed, her eyes darting across the screens, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of her pursuer. The cameras flickered with static intermittently, distorting the images at the most crucial moments. Just as she was about to turn away in frustration, one monitor, positioned at the back entrance, cleared to show the figure. It was no more than a silhouette, a shade darker than the surrounding night, but it was unmistakably there, and it was unmistakably watching the camera. Watching her. Emma's heart sank as the figure began to move, its motions eerily smooth, almost gliding towards the front of the store where she was barricaded. The cameras along its path went dark, one by one, as if it were snuffing out the light as it passed. Emma felt the walls close in around her. The security office, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. She knew she had to leave before it reached her. The back door was her only escape. It would lead her out into the alley behind the store. Grabbing the store's master keys from the drawer, she steeled herself for the cold outside and the unknown dangers that awaited her in the darkness. Emma unlocked the back door, the night air biting her skin as she stepped out. The alley was deserted, the dumpster bins casting long shadows under the moonlight. She hesitated, her fear of the dark open space battling her fear of what was inside. She could not stay frozen in indecision, not when every moment brought her pursuer closer. Just as she was about to turn and run, a low, malicious chuckle filled the alley, echoing off the brick walls and freezing her in place. The sound was followed by a slow clap, mocking her terror. "Very clever, Emma." The voice was smooth, almost amused. "But did you really think you could escape me?" Emma turned slowly, her flashlight beam trembling as it settled on the figure at the end of the alley. It stepped into the light, revealing not a monster, but a man, his features disturbingly familiar. It was Brad, the former store clerk, whose obsession had spiraled into stalking and terror. He stepped closer, his smile wide and unhinged. "It's time to end this game," he said, his voice a chilling whisper that made Emma's blood run cold. Her back against the wall, Emma realized she had one last chance to change the ending of this nightmare. As Brad approached, his intentions clear in his crazed eyes, she took a deep breath, her fear mingling with a newfound resolve. This was her moment, her fight, and she was not going to be the victim in her own story. In the murky world of deceit, fake money often plays a leading role, adding another layer of suspense and danger. Picture this. A cashier, late at night, suddenly discovers that the cash handed over by a mysterious customer leaves an unusual residue on his fingers. It's counterfeit, expertly crafted to deceive but not perfect. This revelation could twist an already eerie narrative into a frenzy of mistrust and paranoia. End quote. Who can be trusted when the money itself turns fraudulent? If you found yourself intrigued by this unfolding drama, there's more to explore and uncover. How deep does the deception go? Who else is involved? To find out, make sure you like, comment, and engage with these stories. Every piece of your feedback adds depth and perspective to the narrative, shaping the direction of upcoming installments. Most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to the Johan Co Horror YouTube channel. By following, you ensure you never miss out on the latest episodes, where dark tales and mysterious dealings come to life. Dive into the shadows with us, share your thoughts, and be part of the thrilling journey ahead. Every like, every comment, and every subscription helps unravel the next layer of mystery. Join us, and let's discover together what lies beneath the surface of these chilling tales.